This week I had a whole bunch of par-cooked pork belly left over from a prayer ceremony before my wedding. And rather than eating it as is, I decided to make use of it by braising it in cola. This may sound kind of crazy or disgusting, but there is precedent for this. People definitely do it in various cuisines. It makes total sense when you think about it, because Coke has a bunch of aromatics in it that go very well with certain types of cuisine. And beyond the aromatics, the sugar content means that as this reduces, it'll turn into a sweet glaze. In this case, I'm doing something that kind of resembles a northern Chinese braise, although I didn't follow any specific recipe, but I've done things like this in the past. So my first step is to cut this into bite-sized pieces. This is going to be going for a little while. I want the braising liquid to touch as much of the meat as possible, but I don't want to make it so small that it'll just fall apart. Next up, I'm going to throw my wok over medium-high heat. Add in the pork belly. Stir it around and let it brown on all sides, and hopefully render out some of the fat. Once it was looking nice and brown, I removed it off to the side. And unfortunately not as much fat rendered out as I would have hoped. I was hoping for a free source of cooking fat, but had to add in a little bit more oil before going in with some aromatics. Here I've got about a tablespoon of Sichuan Peppercorns, a few dried chilies, a couple Star Anise, 1 cinnamon stick, and an orange or a tangerine peel. I stirred those around and toasted them in the oil before adding in some garlic. Now, Chinese food, and northern Chinese food especially, uses a ton of garlic, so I'm going in with about 6 or 7 big cloves here. I just chopped off the root side, smashed them to make the paper come off easier, and then roughly minced them. No need to go super small here, because it's going to be braising, it's going to break down, it's going to turn into nothing eventually. So I just half-assed it and threw it in with the rest of the aromatics. Some of the spices had absorbed some of the oil, so I added in a splash more, and luckily the wok is hot enough to almost instantaneously heat up the oil. So I stirred that around until the garlic started getting soft and fragrant. Then I went in with a couple tablespoons of Doubanjiang. This is a fermented chili bean paste that's pretty quintessential in Sichuan cuisine, but it's also used across China as well. It'll add some heat, some umami, generally good flavors. I want to stir that around and fry it until the oil turns red. Then I went back in with my pork. Tossed it in the aromatics and the sauce so that everything was evenly coated. Then I added in a tablespoon of soy sauce, a tablespoon of dark soy sauce for color, and a tablespoon of Shaoxing Wine. Seasoned with salt, mixed everything together, and covered it up with a 600 milliliter bottle of Coke. The amount really isn't important here. You kind of want the meat to be submerged in the first half, but it's not totally necessary because the vapors will sort of steam everything that's not touching the liquid. I brought that up to a simmer, then reduced the heat to medium-low, covered it up and let it go for about an hour. With these small pieces of meat, you don't really have to wait that long before it gets tender, but your mileage may vary depending on what kind of meat you're using. I checked my progress along the way, giving the meat a good stir so everything gets an even chance of getting cooked. And then towards the end of this, I realized I had some of these tiny little eggplants. I forget what they're called. I think they're fairy tale eggplants or something like that. Anyway, I figured they would go really well with this. So I sliced off the stem, cut them in half, dropped them in, stirred them around, and cover that all up for a little bit longer. After about an hour, the spices should have done their job, so I removed the cinnamon stick and the Star Anise. And since the meat was fully tender at this point, I decided to speed up the reduction of the sauce by just leaving it uncovered for the last 10 or 15 minutes, until it got nice and thick and turned into a sticky glaze. At that point, this was ready to plate with some white rice, and of course some blanched broccoli. And for something that's probably the textbook definition of processed foods, Coca-Cola makes a surprisingly good braising liquid. The pork is super tender, every piece is covered in a sweet, sticky glaze, and you really get the flavor of the aromatics that are in the Coke as well as the ones that I added myself. This is really hearty and spicy and super delicious, and it even reminds me of a dish I had at a diner in Beijing, which really surprised me. Maybe they were using Coke as well.